There's a reason why the media that we love has its production process broken up into multiple steps with specialist artists all along the way, and this video really exemplifies that point. Hi, hey, hello. If you're new here, my name is Rain. If you're not new here, welcome back. I really appreciate you stopping on by to my little corner of the internet. I would really appreciate it if you draw alongside me during this video, and if you feel comfortable, share it with me because I like to support you the way that you support me. But as for the topic of this video, I am trying to figure out world building components for the comic that I want to do. Mini comic, maybe full comic, we'll see how ambitious I actually end up being. And I'm trying to think of the main locations and really get down those environments that I want to be consistent throughout the media. So if you want to hear about my comic, which is queer, disability, regency, overthrow the government, eco stuff, that's a lot. That's a lot of tags. It'll make sense when I explain it. If you want to hear about it, stick around, look at the environments I try to design, and we're going to really talk about why I'm trying to decide these main environments for the main locations that I want my story to be centered around. Additionally, and finally, if you have the time to watch this video all the way through to the end, I would really appreciate it because I will share some actually decent ideas I came up with this week to balance out just how poorly the environment drawing goes for me. I'll also be talking about why the media process and why the animation and comic industry is broken up into multiple parts and why this is just the pinnacle of why the media we love is so good and all of the different spaces and roles that artists exist for, and just praising just good media because this is questionable from me. The SparkNotes plot synopsis of the general storyline kind of plays on a lot of tropes. However, we are going to be basing, we as in there are multiple of me, what am I on? Basically, my characters are based off of species of mushrooms, and they came to exist basically through, I'm not entirely 100% sure, either a war against humans or a parasitic infection that overtook humans, and only some evolved and managed to take on the parasite, which mingled them with mushrooms to live on. Mycorrhizal fungi, which are the little shwibidoops that come out of fungi and allow them to kind of establish relationships for nutrient sharing with trees. A lot of them are parasitic in some capacity or another, whether they're parasitic in a kill you kind of way or parasitic in a I'm definitely not good for you, but it's not the end of the world is, questionable. But a lot of mycorrhizal relationships are parasitic in nature. And so basically, I'm kind of torn between a mushroom versus human, plants versus zombie style war where humans lost and the mushroom people rose up, or a parasite that came from kind of the destruction of nature, mushrooms evolving at a rapid pace to try and increase their survival and then conquering their enemies, which would be the human race. That's kind of the eco component of it, because I do care a lot about sustainability and environmentalism. I do volunteer for a sustainability company, and I got my degree in botany, so obviously I care about the planet at least a fair bit. But that's kind of a component that I definitely want to be an underlying feature. They are plant people, so it only makes sense, right? Anyway, to put aside that eco plot point to our characters, I like a story that is equally character driven as it is kind of plot driven. I do like a story that has very engaging characters that kind of progress a narrative quite well. I don't like them to be a vessel exclusively for plot. Equally so, I don't like a story that's just all character, no plot. I like there to be an end goal. I want there to be something worth reading for, even if you don't like the character. And so that's generally important to me. However, moving on to the characters and that plot, underlying thing is tangential, not baseline. Trumpet of Death is a mushroom that I designed for Funguary that is very jester themed, very funky. You can watch the video where I design her official proper jester outfit. It is my last week's video, so that is how I design character outfits. She is effectively a kind of farmer's daughter, agriculture worker's daughter, the kind of classic system where the people of the lower class are responsible for a lot of the primary functions that a kingdom relies on, and it is generally an oppressive and toxic regime. She breaks into the kind of jester process for the palace so that she can establish close relationships, attend a lot of events, and acquire intel on the inner workings of the kingdom so that she can eventually and inevitably assassinate the king or the entirety of the royal family so that a new leader can rise up and kind of fix the gap that exists between the lower class and the upper class, and effectively no middle class. It's very much a incredibly unbalanced hierarchical regime where she inevitably kind of falls for wrinkled peach mushroom, the soft, squishy environmentalist, save the planet, yippee daughter of the king who doesn't believe in the inequity and the effective stripping of human rights and the oppression of the underclass society. And yeah, so those two kind of fall in love. How it'll end, I haven't decided if they get executed or not. No, I'm kidding. But I want to make mini comics exploring general important themes regarding kind of the relationship, disability in lower classes, because I'm middle class, but disability just in general from an oppressive government is something that I really want to explore more of in my art. As somebody who does disability representation art and finds their work to be incredibly important for creating catharsis, it's also important for me to kind of explore the things that make being disabled in my country kind of a stigma. And I don't think that stigma comes from necessarily or entirely a past or the actual kind of like rhetoric that was pushed about us in previous centuries entirely. Yes, of course, we were actual like jesters of royal families because they thought our disabilities were funny. They found pleasure in watching us try to do mundane things that we are maybe less capable of doing or struggle to do without support. Yes, however, equally so, I don't think that we have to maintain that rhetoric in our country, and that a lot of people don't agree with that rhetoric personally. And yet it's still an incredibly stigmatized thing, and I think that's largely because of the inaccessibility of the accommodations that we need, the difficulty that comes with surviving with a disability, the way that we have to effectively almost lie to get jobs because nobody wants to hire disabled people, because why hire someone you have to accommodate if you can hire someone not, even if we are more qualified a lot of the time. And I want to explore how a lack of income kind of makes surviving with those disabilities a lot more complicated, a lot more difficult to manage, and how, while it is never easy for anybody, the income and the class disparity does play a large role in the actual comfort. And that is something that I want to be able to talk about and kind of vent my own frustrations about in a format that is kind of like appealing and digestible and can exist just within the realm of fiction. People don't need to extrapolate it to the real world if they don't want to, but it still allows me to have that sense of catharsis and that sense of comfort for myself, if that makes sense, because a lot of my disability work that is a bit more just macabre and depressing, it makes me feel better and it creates a pretty picture, but I can't actually articulate all of the issues or the things that come with it in a way that people will actually always read. I do have artist statements that I pair with a lot of them where I describe my process and how I came to the point in my life where I ended up having to make this art piece for my own sense of like security and catharsis. But in a comic format, it can be entirely fiction and people don't need to think about it deeper. It doesn't have to be deep. It can be a part of a narrative. It could be a plot device for creating a dynamic and creating a representation that people don't have to relate to but still can enjoy. You know, they don't need to have the same condition as my character or a condition as all to see how it creates value for that character's story and adventure, and to kind of create that dynamic relationship. And I think that that's also the type of representation we need the most in the world, is the representation that isn't like, here I am, I'm disabled, look at me, I'm a disabled entity. I think we need the representation of simply a disabled character existing, where their struggles are a component of the plot, they're a component of how they exist in the world, but the disability is a facet and what drives the character to their position. It's the inequity, it's the difficulty of acquiring resources, it's the desire for people like them to have a more comfortable life. But overall, it is the class system that they are trying to conquer. It is the falling in love that comes along the way. It is the simple act of existing and kind of pursuing that job, pursuing that position where they can create equity that is the driving force. Their disability inspired it, but they're not trying to cure it or to become more perfect or to get rid of it. They're simply trying to acquire a state in the world where everybody has equal access to the resources that they need, and where people of disabilities do not need to do hard labor or possibly borderline self-destructive tasks to simply survive, because income and the protections of these people aren't in place, right? And so I want to have it be something that inspires and drives but doesn't dictate all, and because that's the type of stuff that I needed in my life when I was younger. Getting to see people pursue a passion and an ambition without the perception of their condition completely destroying them or destroying their prospects. Additionally, I want to kind of undo the rhetoric personally. Like, I don't expect this to have any lasting impact in anyone's life beyond mine. I think that's how you should. I don't think that's how you should, but it's how I like to treat art. I want to make an impact in my own life and my own personal well-being. I want to think, what did I need? And then it is with hope and optimism that other people find pleasure and enjoyment in the work I create, find catharsis, think deeper about something, or simply enjoy the art and the narrative that I'm capable of portraying, no matter how long or short a comic is, be it one page, a couple panels, or 10, 20, 30. Oh God, please don't tell me I'm going to make a webcomic. I can't be a webcomic person. I don't have the drive for it. I'm not good enough at long-term narratives for it, but dang. If I was like a good writer, I would be a webcomic early, and I know it for a fact, but I'm not. I can't write a long enough plot for that to be even remotely acceptable. But I want to capture people's lives, and I want to be able to make a collection of these moments, of these kind of casual interactions where you're working for something more, you're working a job, and you're simply trying to do what you believe is right for the society that you live in, for the people that you love, for the people that you care about. And I want to make a comic where a character is something that I can relate to and find catharsis in, because it was something that was so rare for me when I was a child. If actually I can't think of any disabled characters from when I was a kid that I related to, now that I think about it. But I did have the socially awkward characters that didn't interact with people, and to an extent existed a life that was more similar to mine because they didn't interact with others and they were shy and uncomfortable and spent time kind of disconnecting from those people. So it's a give or take for a lot of these, but I want a character that feels like home. And I have fictional characters that I do value and I do find some relation to, but I want one that truly feels right for me. One that truly kind of creates that home that I needed and wanted when I was younger. And I think that is the driving force for me even wanting to make a comic now, is to create something that is a little bit more long-lasting for myself, for my life, where I get to have that kind of home in my art beyond the singular illustration. Like my other original characters, Eris, Vivian, and Nameless, they are incredibly important to me. However, I think that their universe and their dynamic is a bit too complex for me with where I am artistically right now and what I would want to be conveying. And so I want to start with characters that are a little bit more confined in their existence and are perhaps a little bit easier to kind of dictate a narrative of, at least for my first go at this as an independent artist outside of a classroom, outside of an obligation. So let's talk about that skill level and those issues that I started facing when I actually started getting into the environment design for this. So like the millisecond that I decided to draw and sketch out and plan the introduction scene and think about how I wanted the narrative to go before and after that, I'm not somebody who can write something linearly. I wrote the start and all the comic panels I want to make for that. And then I have the middle part of the introduction I need to do to lead up to where they meet for the first time, right? World building and stuff is planned for kind of later because I don't know how I want to approach it, right? I'm not someone who is smart enough to work this out linearly and actually have it like exist like a proper comic book, right? Like these are going to be snapshots of the interactions for the story I want to build, and then maybe one day I will connect them all or find it in a way where I can connect it all into some bigger project. But for now I'm looking at snapshots of the building of the relationships, right? And the establishing of these goals. So immediate, I know exactly how I want them to be introduced, okay? Because wrinkled peach mushrooms have guttation. Guttation are these massive kind of leakages that come out from excess fluids in mushrooms, and wrinkled peach mushroom has some of the prettiest guttation ever, okay? It looks like crystal liquid amber. Sometimes it's a bit more of a pink peachy hue. It's gorgeous, okay? And that was what really drove me to doing wrinkled peach mushroom in the first place and making her a soft, compassionate entity who hurts seeing the other people who are suffering in the lower class and wanting to create equity and a more connected and supportive government and social system, right? A very empathetic person who is probably too soft to make the hard decisions needs someone to make the hard decisions because she always wants the nicest, most pleasant possible outcome, which is not always going to happen in a political structure, no matter the era I set it in, right? Not even in dystopians can you have a like perfectly normal, good, safe system that like no one has to make a hard decision literally ever, right? It's not going to happen. However, I really want the scene to set her up, her first time in the picture, to be her being a compassionate entity who is continuously ignored by the more strong-willed and tyrannical people of the system, right? And crying on the steps makes perfect sense to me, okay? Crying on the kingdom sets, wow, I just am so bad at English. This is why I'm not a writer, guys, okay? This is why I can't even speak. But crying on the kingdom steps not only puts her in a position of vulnerability, it provides an opportunity to have the Trumpet of Death mushroom, which I'm going to think of a shortening for their names. I considered doing acronyms. I hate it. WPM and TRD or TD, not for me. Maybe I'm going to shorten it to Death and Peach. Maybe Trumpet and Peach. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll give them totally normal names and they'll be just inspired by the mushrooms in like looks, and then they get an inspired normal-ish name. I haven't figured that out yet, okay? I care about the characters and like what I want to set up, and I don't think I want them to introduce themselves. I don't think I want them to say their names. I want this to be a mostly or almost silent interaction, right? A moment of compassion from somebody who is beneath her class-wise and giving her care, right? Because I want Trumpet of Death to come down the steps and help her up and continue on their way to their positions. Obviously, a court jester is not somebody who is going to be in a position of power. They are there to entertain. They're probably usually of the lower class, but maybe they're of the few middle class just because they work for the kingdom. People like that don't interact compassionately with the people who are making it difficult. If anything, they exist in fear and they do things out of obligation for losing what little rights that they do have, right? And so that moment of compassion and that moment of interaction can spark that interest and that intrigue in actually interacting with the people of the class that she is so desperate to protect interpersonally, spark that curiosity, that research, and the kind of naive approach to trying to figure out a little bit more about what life is like, especially because I don't see that compassion occurring even in a familial sense within this kingdom. I don't see a loving mother that dotes on her daughter or anything of that nature. No sort of kind of empathetic and kind of emotionally open relationships. That's just something that feels really natural for how I anticipate this going. So the compassion is also a bit of an interest in experiencing it from somebody who isn't a maid who is doing it out of pure obligation, you know? Somebody being nice just for the sake of being nice is something that is just absurd within the position that she's in, and a rarity to encounter, which I think then establishes connections and a desire to interact with that specific entity again, to create the reason for the follow-up, to ask the why, the what, the huh, basically. And so, of course, crying on the steps also puts her in the position where, one, I have Trumpet of Death coming down the stairs towards her. So it positions the quote-unquote inferior character above the quote-unquote superior character, which I think is just a fun dynamic and I like it. And then secondarily to that, it gives me the ability to kind of frame out that this is a kingdom environment, because I know how I want it set up prior to this, and I have a lot of vagueness. So the kingdom environment makes sense. Also, if you can still see, like, or saw the sketches on the other page of, like, the people being literally, like, consumed and murdered by plants, you can ignore that. That is for a art piece that I want to make about imposter syndrome for artists. And I realize it looks really weird and completely out of context for the piece. But I immediately realized I have no idea how to draw stairs. Not only do I not know how to draw stairs, I don't know how to draw castles or kingdoms or interiors. I've never drawn the inside of a building and not cried before in my life. I can recall the last two buildings / interior places I have drawn willingly in my life. Actually, not willingly. One is my thick, dumpy Victor drawing that I have digitally done, and I still haven't lined that building, like the inside. And it's very simple. It's like a bookcase and a blackboard and like some boxes on the floor. Like, it's minimal to no effort interior. Then in that basic drawing class I talk about sometimes that I took at college when I was 14 through concurrent enrollment, where it like literally traumatized me from art for a couple of years before I got back into it. I had to hike down a hill carrying my portfolio that was too heavy for me to draw a hallway, and I was already on the verge of tears because it was so uncomfortable and the mobility van wasn't available at the time. And then they left me there because I wasn't finished yet and it was dark, and I'm scared of the dark now as an adult. I was more scared as a 14-year-old on a college campus of adults. And, like, the doors lock around 7 o'clock from the outside, but, like, you could still leave. And it was awful. So I can't recall any other buildings. I'm sure I've drawn an interior other than those two. I'm sure I've drawn others. I just can't recall them. Like, there's nothing in my brain. I've always been not so great at perspective. I usually can fumble my way through it pretty good, as you'll see later. But, like, the stairs, like, the complex winding stairs I want, the railing that I want, and I want it to look kind of dilapidated and destroyed. I want the parasitic infection / war to be something that has really left a lingering destruction, but that nobody ever actually cared to fix. Whatever it is that occurred, war or just like basically mutancy, I want it to be something that they are so proud of achieving the victory in, that they have more or less left most places in some state of ruin as a kind of way of memorializing and commemorating the win. Because I think that's a really interesting way of kind of like approaching and thinking about wars, combat, and like successes in these kind of environments is, as time goes on, everything wears down eventually regardless, no matter what. Yes, of course. However, we often erect statues and monuments and massive art pieces that commemorate singular moments. We have kind of memorial art pieces that span hundreds of thousands of feet to commemorate people. And I don't think that this is a culture capable of commemorating like that. I don't think they're a culture that is capable of seeing the value in that type of memorialization. Rather, they find the win within the destruction of the place that they have conquered. I think that they are the type of culture to continue to exist within the spaces that are worn down and only fix what is necessary for structural stability. Equally so, mushrooms are at least 50% of the genetic makeup, right? And mushrooms don't really need that type of stability. The comfort that they are seeking out is the kind of comfort that is the bare minimum for human survival. As mushroom people, I think they're very capable of adapting to extreme environments, extreme conditions, if necessary. I think the pursuit of comfort and kind of aestheticism in the space is kind of appealing to the half of them that is human and those kind of human instincts that drives us towards that. You know, mushrooms are capable of existing just about anywhere. They feed on dead matter all the time, like pile of dead leaves, yummy, I guess, right? Like, they're very different from us in terms of how their kind of existence is and what their morals likely would be if they were living. And so I want to kind of have a visual connection to the fact that these aren't humans, beyond the fact that they are inspired by, and some of them are going to look more mushroom-like inherently as opposed to others. I think that some will be substantially more mushroom, less human in terms of their makeup. And that, I think, is going to be obvious. But I also want it to be obvious in the way that they live, the way that they exist within a space. And I don't think that they would care to fix up the place beyond what appeals to their baser instincts, and that they would enjoy the destruction and the rubble and the cracks and crevices that permit them to kind of exist within a wild and unmaintained space, if that makes sense. So, I have dilapidation kind of like on the bingo card, but that doesn't really change the fact that I don't really know how I want to navigate that balance, and I have no architectural awareness at all. Didn't find out until I was working on this, but like, I don't know what's necessary to create a building that looks like it is like going to stand up while also being slightly destroyed and not super intact. Like, I can't figure out exactly where that balance is. So I initially approached kind of fantasy realm approach to the initial conceptualization. The first building was probably my most successful interior design for the castle, to be honest. Like, you probably saw the best and we're in the worst now. But I was thinking about the kind of whimsical, the winding kind of archways that are possible, and almost like a hidey hole kind of space. That's a really unprofessional way of articulating that. A place with a lot of coves, a lot of winding staircases, hiding spots, kind of elaborate extra architecture that creates a almost natural feeling, right? Like, not bringing nature indoors because it probably wouldn't be stable enough. But building the indoors around nature that you can kind of just let it kind of like come through the walls, or architecture that kind of emulates it. I was thinking like tree inspired kind of oh gosh, I took art history how many times and I can't think of the word. The posts that hold up coliseums and stuff, the support post. I'll think of it after I've done my voice recording and I'll feel stupid, but the post that holds stuff up. I was thinking tree inspired, very textured walls to kind of feel also maybe more stone or tree like, not plaster. Who cares about plaster? The only plaster that's in this place is if they're domesticating an existing building that they have kind of like reclaimed, right? Which I think this is going to be 50-50. It makes sense for the palace to be something that was built upon what was conquered. And I foresee like them not liking modern architecture much, so very much some of it being destroyed and then just kind of like added onto for the sake of like appealing to themselves, not fixing their messes, of course, as I mentioned, but like just smacking stuff down and then like reworking it like puzzle pieces or something. Like just like, yeah, slap that chip of plaster over there. It looks great. It doesn't look great. But I also need to be aware of the need for consistency. I can't just design a place that I can't consistently replicate, which is something that I'm trying to find the healthy balance between, which is why having the kind of spirally curving spaces that can cover a lot of the zone from top-down views, but also from down-top views, you just see the underside of it. It creates less of a need for consistent details for both halves, depending on where you are within the space. Additionally, big, blocky, chunky shapes is something that I think is very important, at the very least, for consistent indoor architecture that is not going to be kind of strongly overtaken by nature. A space where you can kind of consistently think, oh, I know exactly where this is. In nature, it is kind of unpredictable. Plants may go, come. I can have fresh blooms, and a shrub is going to look like a different shrub the next day if the wind blows strong enough. I don't need to worry about my shrubs being identical, right? Like, gardens can be a little bit more fluid and fun with how they're looking, and that has been my struggle point. I'm having such a hard time envisioning a consistent space that I can repeatedly draw. And it has been my greatest challenge in even thinking about this comic. Character design comes very naturally for me. The idea comes and then it gets spewed out onto the page rather quickly. However, trying to think about a space that people are existing, interacting, and living in and then for it to need to exist beyond the one illustration is something that I'm finding incredibly challenging. And that's why I am so in love with the fact that the art industry breaks up these positions and these responsibilities, because we all have our strong suits, and this is a strong suit I have to challenge, I have to confront. I don't have a choice in the matter. I can't just pawn this off onto somebody else, and I need to do good enough that I can be proud of my work and comfortable and happy sharing it en masse over and over and over again. Yes, while I do think shortcomings are going to always be a part of art, I need to just work to improve this until I'm happy and comfortable with it, so that I can feel good sharing my comics. And I know if my character design and my story is compelling enough, my inability to draw interior isn't going to matter that much. But it matters to me that I kind of address that this is something that I need to work on artistically to improve and be a more well-rounded artist. And I'm sure it's going to teach me an epic amount of information about persistence and all of the ways I can sob into a piece of paper. But I'm very appreciative for the fact that this is a moment where I realized I desperately need to learn something, and I'm very out of my depth. I'm very not certain on how to approach it quite yet. When it's a one and done illustration, I can just kind of rework it until it feels good enough, but this is something that is going to be a consistent issue arising, and I should just address it now instead of trying to fumble my way through it until it works. So I just need to start at the very beginning, which is something I've never had to do with interior before, really. So I'm not entirely 100% certain exactly where I'm going to start with it. I do have some books about architecture in kind of like games and anime and stuff. I recently pre-ordered a Cathedral by John Howe because I love his illustrations. I love architectural art. I've just never done it. So I'm going to be going to YouTube. I'm going to be researching a lot of information about this topic and really working on doing simple studies at first and then building up. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't show and kind of articulate the discomfort and the confusion that came with it for the sake of the video. And I think it's more effective for me to show the struggle point and then discuss how I plan to improve and then kind of check back in later when I've done something and gotten a bit better, than just acting like I didn't struggle and have a mini emotional breakdown trying to draw a cobblestone building, because that wouldn't be fair and that wouldn't be authentic to what it means to be an artist. There's little point in identifying an artistic shortcoming if there isn't also a goal of then improving upon those shortcomings. So what is my plan of attack? What am I going to do to solve this crisis that I have found myself in? Well, I have, first off, 2 books that I'm going to be revisiting from my art book collection. One is Art Fundamental Theory in Practice. I also have Art Fundamentals 2nd edition, but I think Art Fundamental Theory in Practice has a little bit more information about environments and kind of building that space and how composition is important. And then I also have an art book on anime architecture. I think that I might also reference my Studio Ghibli art book from time to time because it does have sketches and kind of breaks down those spaces a bit more and kind of like how they're constructed. However, anime architecture is supposed to be something to help me get a wide array of stylistic decisions and stylistic approaches to environments in one place without making like an entire Pinterest board, because I'm not good at like checking my Pinterest boards. I put references in them and then I never look at them again. I only really look at things that I download to my computer as references, and so having physical books is kind of like the only way that I will continually take in a diverse amount of information as an artist, because I can like surround myself in them. So I have so many art prints on my wall. So I'm going to be referencing those books and trying to kind of relearn those fundamentals. Then I do have 3 artists and then one I think is going to be very beneficial to me that are really good at environments and making a scene feel homey and creating a space where you really like want to connect or it feels right for the piece. Now, my favorite one to like regularly check in on the art of is Derek Dominic D'Souza, I believe is his name. I really like his anime art and I really, really like his environments because they're so impressionistic and lovely, and I really like watching his approach to illustration. Then 2 artists that I have watched tutorials from in the past and really like benefited from are Mark Brunett and Victor Staris. So I'm going to be revisiting all of their videos on kind of like environments, building up space, like art and art perspective. I almost said art anatomy. And kind of like re-familiarizing myself with their instructions and really like forcing myself to pay attention. I don't think I've really checked in on their content since I wanted to like draw a space one time and then I gave up. So I never really pushed myself the way that I should have at the time. Then I saw that BAM Animations has a video on environments, and I think it'll be very important for me to also get some perspective. So I'm going to check out that video, and I anticipate that it'll be a little bit out of my style and general goal, but it'll be very important for me to maybe think about framing environments within a comic, which is really important for me. The 3 earlier artists I mentioned don't really do comics, so I really need to think about kind of like a panel, how you're putting information into a continual space. So I'm hoping BAM Animations will at least set me up in the right direction to exploring that further. So yes, I'm going to watch these videos, I'm going to review these books, but what am I actually going to do to achieve this progress? So consistent environment practices. I do warm-up sketches every day or doodles. I think doodling is a very important thing as an artist. Yeah, I doodle on sticky notes and I very rarely keep them, but I think it's important to doodle, to put pen to paper and just scribble out thoughts and shapes and just loosen up the wrist, right? Even if you're not planning on drawing. So I doodle every day. The goal is to make those doodles a little bit more intentional and try to doodle like spaces and environments. Do little thumbnails and start thinking about the composition just a little bit while I'm drinking my morning coffee or during a lull when I'm working with a student. You know, they're reading something, I'm not doing anything. Working on it then in those little moments. Then I want to do 30-minute to an hour art studies, like I did with the not so successful attempt at a cobblestone building. I want to do 30-minute to an hour studies that are small, bite-sized, and impressionistic in nature. I don't want these things to be hyper detailed because if I focus on making detailed works now, I'm never going to actually make the improvements I need to make good work in the future. I totally could have worded that sentence better, but I don't need to focus on details in this moment. I need to focus on shape, composition, and perspective, creating the illusion of there being detail, right? I've never been one for hyperrealism because I don't think hyperrealism is necessary to convey the same amount of information, right? And stylization is something that I find very inherently beautiful when it comes to art. It's very important to me. So it's something I'm going to be maintaining. I'm not going to be pursuing realistic landscapes or architecture. I'm pursuing conveying the necessary information and having it fit within my art style. So I'm planning to do 30-minute to an hour studies that are completely tonal, ideally. My gray paint pens are clearly not the same like color. Like I definitely have like a blue, a French, and a warm gray at least in these paint pens, so it definitely didn't work this time. But maybe it'll have to be done in markers. I'll probably do digital studies so my reference can be on the like page directly next to it and I can kind of like reference them directly one-to-one. I usually have my references on my mobile phone when I'm looking at something, and so it doesn't actually one-to-one. I still have to scale it up. Digitally, I can have them like right next to each other and have them be the size I want. So I might be focusing on digital studies initially as well. I have yet to decide what will work best for me personally and having it be the most effective process. Then I want to do kind of more careful, maybe they will be incorporated into the 30-minute and hour studies, but I want to make sure that I do at least some environmental studies from shows that I like, shows that stylistically capture my heart. Even if I don't care for the narrative, I like the way they look. The look of it speaks to me in a way that really draws me in. So for shows I like that I'm going to be studying from is Arcane, and then I'll be doing some Ghibli shows. I really like Howl's Moving Castle and Spirited Away, stylistically speaking, so I will be looking at those more than others just to try and get a feel for how they do interior spaces. My Neighbor Totoro does have a cute little home in it that I might look at a little bit. I'm going to graduate myself to trying to do like real places and street art. I have a lot of respect for the artist who can just kind of draw a street, right? Like a nice appealing street. And so I want to work on being able to create a convincing kind of street corner. You know, something like that that kind of draws you in and feels very homey and comfortable. Needless to say, I have my work cut out for me. This is going to be a doozy, and it's definitely going to be a learning curve, unlike many other learning curves I've experienced, because while it is just shapes, it's just somehow, in terms of my brain, not something I can compartmentalize the same way I do the animal to human relationship. So it's going to be a hard time for me. If you would like to see updates on my progress prior to me making a video about it, let me know down in the comments below. I'm thinking about doing regular check-in reels, like with my week of environment sketches or every 2 weeks of environment sketches until I feel like I've really like made my claim on what I want to do. So let me know. If you want to see a proper full check-in, be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you can see it when I inevitably have conquered stairways, or at least environments enough that I can fumble a stairway. But with all of this being said, I think we've definitely talked enough. So like the video if you like it, Dislike if you dislike it. Comment down below if you have anything you want to say. Thank you so much for watching all the way through to the end of this video. Subscribe if you would like to see more of my content. If you would like to see more of my proper, actually finished illustrations, be sure to check out my other videos or my website, which is linked down below in the Linktree, and I think even above the Linktree. And with all of this being said, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, wherever you are, and bye-bye!